want to talk to you about genetics. And what I mean by genetics is not just physical genetics, but mental and spiritual genetics as well. The reason for me talking about this is because I think it's very important for people to understand this about themselves. Because without understanding your genetics, you're not really understanding yourself. I didn't actually realise just how, major this was until I actually started really, and it first came from me really starting to look into my physical genetics. So the physical genetics are who you are on a physical level, it's your body. This is comprised of your ancestral lineage and your blood, what flows through your veins. Yes, and this does go into, obviously, race and ethnicity. I mean, my physical genetics and how I started to look into physical genetics was about probably back in around 2013, 14, and I had some, ideas obviously in the early years of my life, what my physical genetics were, but I got confused because a lot of my lineages go back to different Northern European countries. They're not just from one, so it was kind of difficult to kind of really know what they were. The first, my physical genetics are Nordic, Scandinavian, Irish, Dutch, Anglo-Saxon, meaning English. So really Northern European. All my physical genetics are of Northern European stock, which then got me into looking into my ancestral traditions and stuff, which are of Nordic, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, or what you would call Gaelic traditions. And this kind of got me an idea, and it made me then have look back into my history a lot. And when I was looking back into my history, I got flashbacks, and this came through my bloodlines, which through your bloodlines you can access different memories and stuff, and because through your blood you access memories, and this takes you into looking back into your bloodline and stuff, and you can do this by tracing back into history. For example, I can remember when I was looking back into my physical genetics, one really big block for me was actually going into the history of the Middle Ages, because that was a very dark time for, particularly if you were living in Europe at that time, it was a very dark time. That's why it was called the Dark Ages. So there can be a lot of psychological blocks, a lot of like not wanting to look back into that particular part of history. So I think this is all very important to kind of look back into. I mean, I've been going through tracing my ancestral genetics thousands and thousands of years back now, and it's quite incredible. Just like the flashbacks I get from back in history. I think a lot of actually history is not how it has been recorded through the academia and stuff. I think a lot of history has been censored or either not discovered, and this has to due to how a lot of the history comes from a stream up from the Middle East into Europe, instead of actually coming from Northern Europe down into the rest of the world. I mean, that's more from what my perspective is coming from, because it's through my blood being Northern European, so it inherits memories of racial Northern European ancestry, instead of, like, say, another stock of ancestry from another part of the world. I think this is more important to look into from an individual level instead of a collective one. I think looking into race and ethnicity collectively I'm not I'm not going to go and be 100% against it, but I do understand the importance of the tribe and stuff like that. Creating too much of identity around it can lead to all problems of your ego and stuff like that, which is unnecessary. So you've got to kind of look at it from an individual level, and you could be someone of mixed race ancestry, for example, and going into an identity can cause, if you are of a mixture of races, can cause schizophrenia at times if you identify with only one stream of your racial heritage. Obviously, for me, I'm a Northern European, so it's not going to cause that much conflict within myself. But if you're like someone of mixed race and you're looking at it from an individual level, and then you want to get into collectively, getting it to collectively can cause dysfunctions and schizophrenia of your ego, in that sense, because it's parts of your two streams of your blood fighting against one another within you. If you're looking at if you only identify with one stream instead of the other. So also there's, as well as physical genetics, there's also mental genetics. Now, mental genetics has a lot to do with your animal genetics, which we've inherited as well, because we are a mixture of different animal genetics. We're not 100% mammalian like the mainstream science says we are. We are of actually many different genospheres of animal, including mammalian, like I said, avian, reptilian, marine, meaning aquatic and amphibian, and insectoid, or invertebrate. This may seem a bit strange, but this is all part of our mental genetics. If you look at actually the parts of our brain, there's even a reptilian, an avian, and mammalian part of our brain. So this is, even if you want to look at it from a very concrete, materialistic, scientific perspective, that it's still, you can still see it in some ways. So this is more harder to actually get into, because this is not something you can. With your physical genetics, you can get a DNA test, you can trace it back much more easily, and get it and have it looked at it from a very scientific, materialistic point of view. But this is more harder in the sense of that this is more mental. This is more, and it does affect the psychology as well. So a lot of different people have different degrees of this animalian genetics, meaning that some people may have a higher avian genetics, some people mental genetics, some people may have a higher reptilian mental genetics, and so on, or some people may have a higher mammalian genetics. I'm going to get into this a lot more in my upcoming animal totem videos, which I'm working on right now. And I will go into all the different genospheres and explain it there, and explain how to harness these different forms of animalistic mental genetics within you. So spiritual genetics. Now this is one I've least looked into so far, but I'm kind of looking, and I have not a huge understanding of it yet. I think this has got to do with genetics we inherit from the different star systems, and probably the hardest to discover within yourself. I think these are the genetics we inherit down from the different stellar regions within the cosmos and in the galaxy and in the universe in general. So this goes very, very deep and very complex at the same time. And I have some theories about which genetics I have from certain star systems and stuff. I haven't looked too much into this aspect yet. I think maybe it might have something to do with astrology as well. During that, astrology has a lot to do with the stars. I'm going to get into a video about astrology soon. That's what I really want to talk about today, your understanding of your own genetics. What should be looked on an individual level. everyone has their own unique imprint of genetics. Everyone is absolutely unique. No one is 100% the same as each other in their genetic construct, because there's so many different layers and there's so many different levels of it. It's it's very deep and kind of almost like a lifetime exploration of who you are on a genetic level, and it's going to be part of everyone's single spiritual path. And this is something you have to look into if you want to know yourself. It's just a fact of the matter. You can't ignore this. If you don't have a good understanding of it, then you won't understand who you truly are, and what kind of who you truly are as a sentient being on this planet. So that's all I wanted to get into now, and thank you for watching.